You take some.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our first COVID-19 Town Hall, Services for Victims and Survivors. Before we get started, I'd like to run through a few housekeeping items so you all know how to participate in today's event. First, all lines are on mute. If you have a question, you will have the opportunity to text them to today's presenters. Please type in your thoughts into the questions pane of the control panel. You may send them in at any time during the presentation. We will collect these and address them at the end during the Q&A session. If you experience any technical difficulties at any point during our presentation, please explain your problem through the chat feature and we will try our best to address the issue. Lastly, we are recording the town hall and the video will be available on our YouTube page within 24 hours. Please make sure to subscribe to New Jersey OAG on YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and Flickr, and all of our social media platforms for the latest updates on town halls, information, resources, and news from the office. Now, I'd like to hand things off to our host and moderator today, New Jersey Attorney General Grewal.
Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, everyone. First and foremost, I hope that each of you are safe and healthy during the midst of this terrible pandemic. For those of you who are suffering with this virus right now, we wish you a speedy and a full recovery. For those of you that have suffered loss during this difficult time, our sympathies are with each of you. We're here today as part of our first virtual 2121 town hall. We've had over 500 people registered for this program, and I think we have over 300 attendees participating at this moment right now. The goal of our 2121 Community Policing Project, which was started in 2018 and stands for 21 counties, 21st century community policing, was to bring law enforcement, public safety experts, and communities across our state together to discuss issues of mutual concern, to build trust, to develop strategies to address those issues, and collectively promote public safety in all corners of our state. In a typical year, we have about 84 of these meetings, 4 in each county, and oftentimes we end up having more. But given all that we are confronting at this time, we felt that it was important to continue with our 2121 meetings, to connect with you at this difficult time, to provide you valuable information while we stay at home and practice social distancing. And we felt that it was critical that we start our virtual 2121s with today's topic, services for victims and survivors. And that's for several reasons. Chief among them is the fact that we all here at the Department of Law and Public Safety are acutely aware that the same isolation that's helping us flatten the curve and slow the spread of this pandemic also creates an ideal situation for an abuser to continue their abuse of an intimate partner or a child. And we're acutely aware that that same isolation makes it difficult for victims and survivors to seek help, to connect to services, to seek shelter, to report crimes. We anticipated that this would happen. And that's why in early March, we stepped up our efforts to push out information about ways in which you could connect to services, ways in which you could seek shelter. We tried to promote the hotlines that were still open and available to victims and survivors at this time. And our law enforcement officers made it known, and we're out there letting victims and survivors know that our police stations remain open to them, that they could seek TROs, that they could seek help, that our law enforcement officers stand ready to investigate crimes, to prosecute abusers, to do whatever is necessary. And I want to take a moment to thank all of our shelter workers, all of our victim advocates, all of our forensic nurse examiners, all of our law enforcement professionals, interventionists, medical service workers, and others who continue to serve victims even in the face of this health crisis. If we could turn to the chart. But as the chart and the graphic you're about to see shows, we have much more work to do. We know that in periods of isolation, whether it be holidays or other times when people are together in close quarters, that domestic violence and other incidents of abuse tend to rise. So at a time when we would anticipate additional complaints and arrests to go up for domestic violence, as you can see from this graphic, we're seeing the opposite happen. In the beginning of March, we had about 469 reported arrests for domestic violence in this state. That was up from the previous year. But as we see on this graphic, throughout the month of March and into April, domestic violence arrests are going down. And as you can see from the graphic on the bottom part of this screen, domestic violence reports are also going down. And we know that this is not because domestic violence has suddenly gone away or that abusers have stopped taking advantage of or hurting their victims. It's because reporting has gone down. Calls to hotlines have decreased. People are not seeking the help that we're here to provide them. So clearly, more work needs to be done. And all of us who are participating in today's town hall are here to do that work. We want to make sure all New Jersey residents know that services for victims are operational and available. And today's panelists will be speaking more about these services. We have a great panel lined up this morning. We're joined by Pamela Jacobs, the Executive Director for the New Jersey Coalition to End Domestic Violence, Patricia Teffenhart, Executive Director of the New Jersey Coalition Against Sexual Assault, Pamela McCauley, Victim Witness Coordinator for the Essex County Prosecutor's Office, and Elizabeth Ruebman, my Special Advisor on Victim Services, who works at the Attorney General's Office. We'll be accepting your moderated questions at the end, and viewers can submit their questions throughout the hour through the chat feature in the app. However, if anyone out there is in an emergency, we urge you to call 911. Please do not report emergencies via the chat function. So to start us off, I want to introduce Pam Jacobs, the Executive Director from New Jersey Coalition to End Domestic Violence. NJCEDV is a statewide coalition supporting and representing 30 domestic violence programs across New Jersey. Among other things, Pam will speak about the services available to domestic violence victims and how to access them. Pam?
Thank you so much, Attorney General. I appreciate the opportunity to be here and appreciate all that you and your office is doing to help support victims, survivors, and advocates all across the state. So, as the Attorney General mentioned, this can be a very strange and challenging time for all of us. We're all staying home so that we can help keep each other safe, but we know that home is not a safe place for everyone. And we also just want to really emphasize that stay at home does not mean that you have to stay somewhere where you're unsafe. You still have choices available, you have options, and we're here to help. Our team at the New Jersey Coalition to End Domestic Violence, as well as advocates at programs all across the state in every county of New Jersey, are working around the clock to make sure that services are still available and that services are available in a way that they're easier for you to access during this time. So the main thing that we really want to stress today is that programs in every county are open. Advocates are available 24 hours a day in every county of our state. And they're available, these services are available for everyone, regardless of age, income, religion, immigration status, anything that you may have thought was a barrier that may keep you from accessing these services are available for you. So we encourage you to please reach out. All programs across the state have 24-hour hotlines available. Some also have text and email options so that you can reach out in writing if that's safer. And many are responding via their social media platforms. So if you are following your local domestic violence program on Facebook or Instagram, many are able to respond that way as well. All programs are also offering remote advocacy. So they're offering safety planning, legal advocacy, children's services. Advocates are doing incredibly creative things to engage with and help children heal during this time. And counselors are available also and are offering remote advocacy and counseling services. And safe houses and shelters are still open in every county, and every protection is being taken to ensure that these are safe and healthy places for everyone. So they're practicing things like physical distancing, putting more space between people who are staying in the shelters, frequent cleaning, ensuring that people have masks available, anything that needs to happen to make sure that the shelter or the safe house can be a safe space for people as well. And in counties where that space is not currently available in shelters because there are people, because they're full, then we're working with programs to ensure that people have access to hotel spaces. So if you are in need of a safe place to go, there are spaces, there are places available, and there are people available to help. Now, I know that's a scary call to make. I know that the thought of what's on the other side of that phone call or the other side of that text or email can be frightening. But what I want you to know is that you deserve to be safe. Everyone has a right to be safe and to be able to make choices that are best for your life. And you especially have a right to be safe in your own home. I encourage you to reach out. You see our information here. You can at njcedb.org. You can find the program that's closest to you. In addition to all of the services that I just mentioned, many of these programs are also doing classes right now. So classes that can help you with creating a life that's healthier for yourself, a relationship that's healthier for you as well. And also if you're not able to safely call. So if someone at home is monitoring your calls, you don't feel like you can make that call, if you're able to get away even for just a few moments to go to the grocery store, to go to the pharmacy, make the call then. Anytime that you can safely reach out for help. Reaching out for help does not mean that you have to leave. It doesn't mean you have to go to a shelter. It doesn't mean you have to report to law enforcement. It doesn't mean that you have to do anything. It just means that you don't have to go through this alone, that you can talk with someone about what's going on. It's a completely confidential, it can be an anonymous call where you're just reaching out to find out what your options are and have someone to talk to. Also, we want to make sure that you're aware the services are available not only for people who are being abused, but also if you have used violence in your family, whether that's physical, verbal, or emotional in your relationship with your children, with your partner, or if you're afraid that you might. We know that during these times when many things are escalating, that there's a much higher risk of people using abuse as well. We want you to also know that there's help available for you too. There are programs all around the state who are offering virtual counseling, classes, supportive services, so you can call and just process things and choose a different way to respond. Change is possible, and there are people available who want to help you make that change, so please reach out. And finally, for those who aren't currently in a relationship that's abusive, but you have been in the past, these times of isolation can be triggering. They can bring up a lot of feelings, a lot of emotions, a lot of fear that you had from that time. So please reach out to talk with someone about that as well. This is an additional layer of trauma on top of lots of different things that you may have experienced during your life, and it's important that you don't go through this alone. Connection is important for all of us, more now than ever. We may be physically distancing, but we don't have to socially distance. We can reach out and still be connected virtually. And just again, as a reminder, everyone deserves to be safe, especially in their own home. So please reach out and know that there are people who are available to talk to you at any time. Thank you.
Thank you, Pam, for those comments. And we'll save our questions and our discussion once we've gone through all of our panelists this afternoon. But I want to thank you for the incredible work that you're doing under difficult circumstances and connecting victims to services, which, as you laid out, are still available, that we can connect virtually still through the different means that we have available to us right now. Whether it's the hotlines or it's the text addresses or other social media platforms, there are opportunities and ways to connect to services. Our next speaker this afternoon is Patricia Teffenhart from the New Jersey Coalition Against Sexual Assault. The current pandemic presents unique challenges to sexual assault survivors, and Patricia will address those challenges and discuss services and strategies for survivors. So it's my pleasure to welcome Patricia.
Okay, thank you, General, and thank you everyone for being here today. First, I want to start by thanking all of our colleagues at the Office of the Attorney General for realizing the importance and the need to have a conversation like this. Talking about sexual violence on a regular day is challenging. Adding to it the layers of talking about sexual violence in the middle of a global pandemic when there are so many other needs that are impacting our communities is an opportunity I don't take lightly. So many of the comments that were offered by my colleague Pam from NJCDV really resonate for survivors of sexual violence as well. While Pam's remarks spoke very directly to survivors, many of the things that she said are elements and content that are relevant to survivors of sexual violence as well. A lot of my comments will be geared towards the helpers in our communities. I know that we have on the line a number of colleagues from across sectors who are working at the intersections in supporting survivors and those who love them. And so I wanted to make us a little bit aware of some of the ways services have shifted in light of COVID-19. So I'll start by providing a little bit of a background and information about services for survivors of sexual violence in New Jersey. In New Jersey, there is a rape crisis center in every county. And while we would certainly benefit from some improvements to our public transportation infrastructure, relatively speaking, we're lucky here in New Jersey. Services are relatively geographically accessible, which is a huge improvement over what survivors in other parts of the country may experience as they are navigating the challenges of accessing service providers that may be regionally located, and survivors may have that additional burden or hurdle of traveling hundreds of miles just to access critical services. In each of our county-based programs, we offer 24/7 hotline, group and individual counseling, crisis accompaniment for survivors visiting emergency rooms or police stations, and provide community outreach and education programming with prevention expertise. April is Sexual Assault Awareness Month. As you can probably imagine, most of our service providers had a robust calendar planned with hundreds of opportunities to engage communities across the state. And all of that has shifted in light of the global pandemic, but shifted, not ended. And we'll talk a little bit about that as I go on. In 2019, our local programs answered over 10,000 hotline calls, accompanied 1,300 survivors to emergency rooms or police stations, provided counseling to over 7,500 survivors and their loved ones, and engaged with local communities at over 1,800 events, including trainings, workshops, and participation and facilitation of workshops at conferences. And now in 2020, we find ourselves, like everyone else, quickly adjusting to meet the needs of our communities. When we were collecting data for New Jersey's first ever statewide sexual assault needs assessment, the findings of which should be released within the next 4 to 6 weeks, just about a year ago, we were polling service providers throughout the state to see who provided virtual services. And at that point in time, just about a year ago, only 5% of providers indicated that virtual services were available. And in a matter of weeks, in response to COVID-19, 100% of service providers have shifted to virtual counseling, ensuring that the free and confidential services that are provided by our local programs remain accessible during even the worst global pandemics. And the reality is that the way we're serving our communities has changed, but our commitment has not. Survivors still have access to hotline counseling and the crisis services they need. And the reality is that the need is great. For the first time ever in March, the National Sexual Assault Hotline reported that over 50% of their calls came from minors. 60% of those callers identified their abuser as a family member, and 79% said that they were living with that perpetrator. 1 in 5 calls from minors living with perpetrators resulted in employees at the National Sexual Assault Hotline calling police during that phone session, and 4 in 10 calls involved talking about safety planning and how to leave or avoid their abuser. Please know that in New Jersey, all of us are mandated reporters of child abuse, including child sexual abuse. And if minors call any of our local hotlines, our advocates know the process for notifying the appropriate authorities. But if you know or suspect a young person is being abused, Please know that you can call the New Jersey Child Abuse Hotline at 1-877-NJ-ABUSE or 877-652-2873. It's also important to note that for many young adults in college who experience child sexual abuse or sexual violence while on campus, the support services available on their campus may have been a critical resource for them. With campuses now closed, access to those resources may be limited or non-existent. And so please know also that the resources of New Jersey's local sexual violence service programs are available to ensure that those survivors can continue on their pathway to healing. What we know about community crisis is that it compounds personal trauma. Right now, we may be experiencing a reduction in new clients, hotline callers, or survivors looking to access SART services, and that all makes sense. Survivors of sexual violence are weighing the scales, making decisions that are right for them at this moment. Calling a hotline or accessing counseling services or heading to the hospital, those acts are careful considerations by a survivor during normal times, and they're even more complicated during a global pandemic. And that all makes sense. And so a major premise of our anti-violence work is the emphasis on personal autonomy and decision-making. A reminder that we must all support survivors and uphold their need to make decisions that feel right for them at any given time. And provide comfort and reassurance to know that when a survivor is ready to access the free and confidential services available throughout the state of New Jersey, that the help will be there for them, whether it be today, tomorrow, 3 months from now. And they can access services of the local sexual violence service programs by calling our statewide hotline at 1-800-601-7200 or visiting njcasa.org/find-help to be connected to the local county-based service provider. Our hotline advocates are ready to receive your call. Our clinicians are ready to provide counseling and support. Our forensic nurse examiner colleagues are ready to meet survivors to conduct those important medical exams that are part of a rape kit and to ensure that the rest of the comprehensive medical needs of survivors are being met. Our law enforcement colleagues are ready to take reports and help survivors navigate the justice system. As I mentioned, things are being done differently in light of COVID-19, but all survivors should know that New Jersey's commitment to them hasn't wavered. We're here for you now, and we'll be here for you when COVID-19 passes. And I want to thank all of you for joining us today.
Thank you, Patricia, for those comments and for those resources. You know, one thing that you mentioned at the end is that our commitment in the state has not wavered. The commitment of our forensic nurse examiners has not wavered at all. We have been working with them over the last number of weeks to get them the personal protective equipment they need to respond to hospitals, to work with survivors, to collect evidence that's critically important for us to make prosecutions. And they're doing that. They're doing that despite the risks. And even though reporting may have waned because people are not coming forward, our nurses are still there on the front lines. And I've heard remarkable stories where they're not letting down. They're there to help whoever walks into that hospital. And so they're going above and beyond in this moment. And so they should be applauded. And I had the opportunity to speak to some of them a couple of weeks ago and to try to help them get that PPE. So we stand ready at all times, and we stand ready at this time to collect that evidence, to work with survivors and provide those resources. And we'll have additional questions at the end of the program, but thank you for those comments.
Thank you.
Now it's my pleasure to introduce our next speaker in this afternoon's program, and that's Pam Jacobs, who's the Victim Witness Coordinator from the Essex County Prosecutor's Office. We've had a number of questions about what victim services are available through our prosecutors' offices when courts may be closed, when it may be more difficult to connect with law enforcement and our prosecutors' offices across the state. So I wanted to invite Pam to share with us what they are doing in the midst of this pandemic to continue to connect to victims of crime across the state. So thank you, Pam. Pam, I think you have to unmute.
Oh,
You're good.
okay, thank you. I want to first start out by saying thank you very much for the invitation and the opportunity to talk a little bit about the county offices, county prosecutors' offices of victim witness advocacy. We are all working remotely at the moment, but we are very much open and providing a level of care and services that victims need in the aftermath of their criminal victimization. We provide crisis services, which would include intervention services, social service, and mental health referrals, criminal justice orientation and assistance, information about the status of cases that are coming through the prosecutor's office is being handled by the prosecutor's office, assistance with property return, as well as restitution requests. The Essex County Prosecutor's Office of Victim Witness Advocacy is part of a statewide network. Every county in the state of New Jersey has a state office of victim witness advocacy. And we here during this pandemic, global pandemic, and even beyond, we are here and we are prioritizing health, personal safety, and connectedness, realizing that there are so many of us who are battling fear and isolation, depression, and even loss. So even though we are not in our offices, we are still reaching out to victims. We are calling, we are connecting with those who are in need of services and are making appropriate referrals for care for both themselves and their families. We are, as I said, we are all part of a network, and we are dedicated to provide a level of care and support to crime victims and their families during this global crisis. We are here, we are available to support where needed and where necessary. In terms of county resources and services, there are family justice centers that are located throughout the state, child advocacy centers that are also open, working remotely, and are available to support and to assist those to provide personal safety to families, and also to help people stay connected. Our Family Justice Center here in Essex County, as well as the other family justice centers throughout the state, are available to provide safety planning. We are the county prosecutors' offices are co-located within the family justice centers, as well as the child advocacy centers. They are available. Services do include legal services, referrals to mental health and crisis intervention programs, referrals to shelter programs, which is very important in terms of keeping people safe. I've also been asked to talk about services that are available right now through the courts. As you all know, the courts and the buildings are not open to the public. However, that does not mean that the courts are not hard at work. Pleas are still being accepted, even though there are no jury trials. The judges have full calendars and are handling their cases remotely. We have special courts, criminal judicial processing courts, detention courts that are open. Our drug court programs are open. Mental health courts are open, and doing businesses. Veterans courts and supports for our veterans are also open and operational, despite everyone working remotely. We are available by phone as well as by emails. You can call. I believe that we have a graphic with all of our contact information within the counties. We are a source of a resource for referrals and information. And as I said, we are here to protect and to serve those people who have the misfortune of being criminally victimized throughout our state. You are not alone. So be well, stay safe, stay strong, be hopeful, and most important, stay home. Thank you.
Mute. Thank you, Pam. And I think one constant we've heard from all the speakers so far is that we are still open for business. We might be working in this new telework reality, but all the services that we provide in normal times are still available to victims and to survivors, even in these difficult times. And it's just, we're offering them in a new way. Our courts are open, hearings are happening, people are being prosecuted, people are being held accountable, restraining orders are being issued. They're just being done a little bit differently. But our police stations are open to victims to come in to report crime, and our courts are open and our prosecutors' offices are doing great work. So thank you for all that you're doing, and we'll circle back with some questions at the end of the presentation. So it's my pleasure now to introduce the next speaker this afternoon, and that's Elizabeth Ruebman, who is my special advisor on victim services. Elizabeth joined the office in March of last year and had been tasked with improving the way that the Department of Law and Public Safety delivers services to victims, with a particular emphasis on underserved communities. She's done incredible work in improving efficiencies in the delivery of services to victims, in increasing outreach and increasing grant opportunities for different groups across the state. And she's going to sort of talk about all the things that haven't been mentioned already, all the other additional services that we're offering in the midst of this pandemic and that are available to victims and survivors across the state. So it's my honor to introduce Elizabeth Ruebman at this time. Elizabeth?
Thank you, Attorney General. Thank you so much. And thanks to all these hundreds of people who have joined us, and to Pam and Patricia and Pamela for sharing their expertise. I want to start out by saying to any victims, survivors who've joined us, that we see you, we hear you, we believe you, and we had this town hall today so that you would know that you're not alone, even during this COVID-19 health crisis. We are getting flooded by chat with great information, great things for us to follow up on. Just want to say we're not going to be able to kind of delve into people's individual cases in this platform, but keep the chat coming. We appreciate all the great feedback we're getting. But I wanted to kind of review some information that a lot of it's already been said, but I feel like people need to hear it over and over again, and then talk about some of the new things we're doing. And I just want to keep mentioning these resources in case anyone out there needs them. So first and foremost, as you've heard, you can still call 911 for help. Police departments are responding and making arrests as appropriate. Victims can still enter police departments for help or to file temporary restraining orders. And if you have any problems, either reporting victimization or filing a temporary restraining order, please call the coalition numbers that are listed, or we provided, or call the State Office of Victim Witness Advocacy, and that number is here. And our tremendous state victim witness advocate, Melissa Miller, will take your call and help us address that. And thank you to Melissa for all the work that you've been doing to help victims throughout this crisis. She is a true hero. So as you've heard repeatedly, the domestic violence and sexual violence hotlines are operating 24/7 to support victims, but I want to make sure that you know that you can also report human trafficking. You can get access to services for human trafficking victims through the National Human Trafficking Hotline, which is coming up. There we go. And if you want to report human trafficking to law enforcement, our state hotline is listed here. And of course, all this information is also on our website, but those hotlines for human trafficking are still operational and supporting victims and taking reports. For victims in need of free legal services, the Office of the Attorney General funds several programs that are totally operational remotely. They've just done an amazing job, and we have 3 of those listed up here. And they'll serve victims of any kind. We fund those through VOCA dollars, Victims of Crime Act funding. This is, of course, in addition to the free legal services that are offered by the Domestic Violence and Sexual Assault Coalitions, Volunteer Lawyers for Justice, Legal Services in New Jersey, and many others. But we want to make sure that you saw these 3 resources, and they've all confirmed that they are providing assistance remotely without a hitch. The Victims of Crime Compensation Office, or VCCO, and if we can just advance the slide, they obviously had to suspend their walk-in services, but they immediately got up and running remotely. And kudos to this agency, they really didn't miss a beat. And you can file claims online or by phone in English or Spanish. And this agency is continuing to process claims and serve victims. Again, without missing a beat. The Office of the Attorney General funds about 150 victim services providers, all of whom are operating remotely and serving victims. And it is just tremendous to see the dedication of these service providers to helping victims. But we know that COVID-19 is putting a huge strain on them. So we have offered all of our current VOCA, or Victims of Crime Act grantees, the opportunity to increase their budgets in order to pay for COVID-related costs, such as overtime, supplies, or emergency relocation for victims. And as the Attorney General was talking about at the beginning, we expect that there will be a huge surge in reporting when infection rates decline and people feel safer to access help. And we want to be ready for that moment. So in response to that kind of burgeoning need, we have just made available $500,000 to each of the county's domestic violence response teams to provide emergency housing for victims in need of housing because of COVID-19. And they'll be accepting referrals from agencies throughout their counties. But we want to thank the OAG grants team for all their work to make this happen. Again, they supporting 150 grantees is no insignificant task, and they've done an amazing job remotely. Finally, the Office of the Attorney General is still very much focused on our commitment to serving all victims of all types of crime in order to break cycles of violence. And I want to tell you that 9 of our new hospital-based violence intervention programs that will serve victims of community or street violence are receiving intense training and technical assistance to get ready for their launches. And what's really incredible about this is that these are hospital-based programs, and obviously hospitals are overwhelmed at this moment, but they're so committed to doing this work with community and street violence victims that they are still participating in this very intense training and technical assistance that we're offering them. And then I just want to end with some really exciting news, and that is that we just announced funding for 4 pilot trauma recovery centers. These are an innovative model that we adopted from San Francisco. And they're going to serve these 4 new sites. There'll be 2 in Newark, 1 in Jersey City, and 1 in Bergen County. And they will serve underserved victims of all types of violence, with a focus on victims who are low income and from communities of color. And these sites are starting their training and technical assistance immediately so that they will be open and ready to serve victims as soon as possible. I wanted to share a resource that came in via chat while we were talking, and that was from the ARC, that they want all DV and sexual assault providers to know that they can access the services of the ARC county chapters when they're working with any victims of developmental disabilities. So I think this is an important resource, and I really thank the ARC for chatting that in. So thank you again to all of you who are serving victims in New Jersey. Thank you all who have tuned in today. I pray that this finds you all in good health, and thank you for the opportunity to speak to you today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, E. And I think what we'll do now is transition to the questions portion. So if we could call up the panelists and have their screens available, and I'll run through the questions that have come in so far. I'll start with one that's come in for me, and that is, did you increase the likelihood of victimization by releasing inmates from county jails? For background, I think the question refers to an order to show cause that the Supreme Court had issued a while back, essentially saying why shouldn't the Supreme Court order the release of certain low-level offenders from our county jails in light of the COVID-19 pandemic and the higher risk that jail populations face with respect to the spread of COVID-19 and the inability to socially distance. So there was a release of inmates from county jails pursuant to this program. But what's important to keep in mind is that our county prosecutors across the state had the opportunity to review who would be released and to lodge objections. And that was important to us because we wanted to make sure that if somebody was in there in a county jail, and again, these are typically offenders who are serving sentences of less than 1 year, 364 days or less, and are likely to be released in the next number of months in any case. And those are the ones that were prioritized. But we wanted to make sure that if there was a dangerous offender, if there was a domestic violence defendant serving a county jail term, that our prosecutors had the ability to object and keep those individuals in and to amplify the concerns of victims to make sure that those type of defendants were not released. And so that process did play out, and we were able to successfully object to the release of a number of individuals who fell into that category. And to keep in mind that those who were released and had conditions on them, that whether it's no contact orders, things of that nature, those stayed in place. And when the pandemic subsides, these individuals will go back in to finish the balance of their sentence. There's also some talk now of a similar program for people near the end of their sentence in our state prisons who are at a higher medical risk right now to be either medically furloughed or that their parole decisions be expedited. In that case, our county prosecutors, our victim witness offices, our state office of victim witness advocacy will advocate for victims in the same way we do in ordinary parole release hearings. So there will be mechanisms in place to ensure that we advocate on behalf of victims and we make their concerns known before those types of release decisions are made. So it was a difficult balance to strike between public health and being mindful of the concerns of victims throughout the state. And it is something that we struggled with, but in the end, we found this balance where we're able to balance public health and public safety in a responsible way. So that's the first question that came in. The next one, I'll go to Pam with this question. Are shelters taking precautions with respect to COVID-19? Are they using personal protective equipment? Should victims be concerned about their health when they're going into shelters?
Thank you, General. So absolutely, precautions are being taken. We have been working around the clock along with the advocates at each of these shelters to make sure that they have cleaning supplies, that cleaning is happening every 2 hours, if not more frequently, ensuring that advocates as well as people who are staying in the shelters have PPE, so have masks, have gloves. There's also been more distancing put in place in shelters so that there's more space between families. And as I mentioned earlier, in places where they've now run out of space, we're helping people get into hotels. And in addition to those short-term options, we also have programs that have transitional housing or that who are able to help people get into permanent long-term housing. And as E mentioned, that's largely in part due to the great work of the Office of the Attorney General and the funds that were made available for that. So reaching out for help doesn't necessarily mean that shelter is the only option. There are other avenues to help people get into safe, possibly long-term housing as well. But absolutely, many precautions are being taken to ensure that those safe houses are safe, both for health as well as personal safety.
Thanks, Pam. I'll go to Patricia with this next question. Most of us aren't trained to respond to survivor disclosures, but if someone happens to share that they've experienced some form of sexual violence, what should we say?
Oh, that's an excellent question, and it's one that comes up often, and perhaps even more so now as I mentioned during my remarks, community crisis really compounds trauma. So what we know is that survivors that maybe never disclosed their victimization before may now be coming to terms with what they've experienced in the past and maybe looking to confide in people that are close to them. The most important thing we can say to a survivor when they make that initial disclosure is, I'm sorry that happened to you. That very simple, non-judgmental, non-probing response can really open up the pathway for a survivor to disclose as much or as little as they'd like to after offering that initial statement. And that really gives the survivor the opportunity to take the lead. They don't have to reveal any more or any less than they're comfortable revealing. And then hopefully there'll be an opportunity through the course of a discussion, and that discussion may not happen immediately. It may end with as simple of a conversation as, this happened to me, and your response saying, I'm sorry, and they may not wish to discuss anymore in that moment. But as the conversation, perhaps over hours or days or weeks continues, and they start to reveal perhaps more as you've established a rapport of trust, maybe you would have an opportunity to direct them to the services of a local sexual violence service program, or let them know about some of the things we talked about on today's call about what's available for survivors in the aftermath of victimization. It's really important to note that this particular type of victimization, our survivors experience tremendous delays in their disclosures, and that there's no time limit to when a survivor can come forward to access counseling or call a hotline. And so we don't all need to be experts and equipped in understanding all of the dynamics. The most important thing we can do is cause no additional harm and just offer an apology, a validation that this was your lived experience, and be ready to offer access to other resources so that they can be looped into services offered by professionals.
Yep.
Patricia, I'm just going to elaborate on one thing.
Thank you, Patricia. I think this one is, yeah, please.
Oh, I just say often we're outraged by what we hear, and we're upset, and our inclination is to say like, oh, he or she's such a horrible person to do this to you, or you must report immediately. And it's important to remember that often a survivor actually loves their abuser, or their victimizer. They may not be ready to do any reporting, and that it's not our job as supportive friends to push them into something that maybe they're not ready for and just makes them feel more ashamed and isolated. And it's a very normal human reaction.
Right.
Yeah.
Thanks, E. And I'll just note we're getting some really specific questions, local, to local responses and to local departments. We'll respond to you and we'll provide you the information and connect you to the right people to address those concerns in those particular municipalities. And so we're not going to take those questions here for the broader group, but we will address each concern that comes in or each question that's raised with us. So let me go to the next general question that we've received, and I'll throw it to the group, but I think it might be one that Patricia would start with. I've been working with survivors that say staying home is a trigger. What resources can I offer her?
Yeah, 100% staying at home can be a huge trigger. I think all of the resources that we discussed on this call today, whether they be VCCO, whether they be Victim Witness Advocate, DV organizations, SV organizations, access to those hotlines and some of those text and chat features that are available across the state have really increased accessibility during this trying time. Staying home doesn't mean that we have to be unsafe or unwell. And as we've discussed on this call, all of our providers are equipped to provide supportive services remotely at this time. And so going to any of those websites or hotlines that we offered earlier on this call can loop a survivor, no matter where they are in the state, into the services that can help them get through this trying ordeal.
Does anybody want to add to that response? I think, that's part of the goal of this seminar is to get those resources and as many ways to connect to services out there, and please share these broadly, share these on your personal social media pages. Share these with your friends, your neighbors, your loved ones, somebody who might be in a difficult situation right now. When it's not so easy to contact a local police department, when it's not so easy to leave a home, and we'll get through some of the questions and talk about some of the other things that we're doing. I think it's helpful for all of us to be an extra set of eyes and ears when we could pick up the phone and check in on somebody, or whether we see something that just doesn't seem right, just to connect and to figure out if there's something more we can do. And I think that's going to help a lot of people in this difficult time as well. I'll throw this one out to Pam Jacobs. Pam, what are the Family Justice Centers? I'm sorry, Pam McCauley.
Yes.
Pam, what are the Family Justice Centers?
There's a number of family justice centers that are located throughout the state. Essex County has a family justice center, and we're lucky because it's located adjacent to our Veterans Courthouse. And this is a program, I believe the Family Justice Center our Family Justice Center has been in existence for over 10 years. And there are a number of community partners who are co-located within the Family Justice Center. The model was developed so that victims of intimate partner violence and their children do not have to go to various agencies and look for resources on their own. One of the most important things that I feel as a victim advocate is that it is not the responsibility of victims in their time of crisis to try to access services on their own. We have an obligation to provide the level of care and direction within the community so that people are safe, they can take and make decisions in terms of their safety and ultimately what they want to do. The Family Justice Center model helps in that cause. The Essex County Prosecutor's Office, as well as other prosecutors' offices within counties that do have family justice centers, are co-located. We have detectives, there are assistant prosecutors, as well as victim advocates who are there to provide the services. There are legal services there. There are mental health, people who can provide the crisis intervention, the counseling services, with the idea that people are just going to be able to provide and to access these services comprehensive, compassionate, empathetic services as their cases are moving through the criminal justice system. But they don't necessarily, even if they are just considering reporting, they have not taken the step to contact police or even the prosecutor's office does not mean that they do not have access and will be serviced through Family Justice Center throughout our states.
Thank you, Pam.
And one more thing, safety planning is key. They do a lot of safety planning and personal safety. That is a priority.
Excellent. We have a series of questions here, and I'll try to group them together about, again, connecting to services and how it's difficult and what more we can do. Someone has suggested, can we put out billboards with the information that we're seeing on these screens? There's a question and a comment from one of our listeners of this webcast about one explanation for the decline might be that phone services are being cut off, that abusers are cutting off phone services at home and home phone lines, and how do we stop that? You know, I think one thing to highlight is the governor had taken steps to ensure that services, communication services across the board were not being cut off at this time, that internet service providers weren't cutting off internet services for financial reasons. But we could be more mindful of this and see if there's additional steps we can take. And then there was a question about connecting to immigrant communities which have language and other cultural barriers. We have a number of stakeholders that we work with, and I think one of the things that we need to do is when we're doing this messaging, have culturally specific messaging for services that might be unique to immigrant communities, and that's something we work with a number of groups in that regard, and we'll continue to push out that information. But one thing that I did want to share, if we could, Whitney, go to the slides with the two pieces of information on them that we put together. One of the things that we realized very quickly was in this situation when abusers are limiting the access that their victims might have to other people or to phones or to social media or internet access. We thought about ways, and it was really born out of the folks on this call, on how can we get this information, the phone numbers, the hotlines, how can we get this information out to people who need the help? And so one of the things that we did as a direct result of preparing for today's town hall is we prepared this flyer. It's a front and back of a flyer that we are now going to put out at all the FEMA testing sites where we're doing the COVID-19 testing. We felt that that was a place that people might go, and they might go if they're potentially symptomatic of COVID-19 and they might need help. And so if we put this resource out there, or if we armed our law enforcement officers who are working at these sites with this information, perhaps that might be an opportunity for somebody to make contact for help. In addition to that, we're going to be pushing this out to supermarkets and pharmacies where we could get this additional information to the hands of more people who could then maybe perhaps find a way to avail themselves to these resources or to additional help. And so I want to thank the folks on the panel for working with us on putting this flyer together, because I think that's another way in which we're trying to replicate that billboard effect that one of the questioners put forward. Like, what more can we do to put this messaging out there? So I'll throw it open if any of the other panelists want to add to those efforts or to comment on the services for immigrant communities or additional ways to connect.
Thank you, General. So I will just share that absolutely all of those concerns that were raised are so important for us all to be aware of. We are having a standing meeting every Friday with culturally specific organizations across the state. Some of our member programs like Monavie and Waffle House are serving specifically immigrant communities all across New Jersey. We also work closely with the Hispanic Women Resource Centers. And really, there are so many service providers around the state who are offering services and really specifically tailoring services for different communities. So I encourage you to, again, call the hotline 800-572-7233. Visit our website. If you're someone who's looking for services or interested in getting involved in supporting those services, we would love to hear from you. So please reach out. And I will just echo everything that Patricia said, that I know everyone wants to help, and we've probably all seen so many posts being shared around social media around how people can reach out for help. The most important thing you can do is be there, stay connected, offer that non-judgmental, non-prying validation and saying that you're not alone and I'm here for you, and then connect people with experts, with the advocates who are trained in how to handle and how to talk with people about these situations. I think that's really the most important thing that we all can keep in mind.
And if I can tackle on top of that, one of the very first questions you mentioned, General, was a caller asking about accessibility, perhaps because technology is being limited, either because the abuser is cutting phone lines. And I want to be really honest, none of us have any false sense that operating in this new normal is the entirety of what we should be endeavoring to do. We know that for many survivors and victims, that opportunity to leave work an hour early, perhaps to get to their counseling appointment on the sly, is the kind of thing that kind of helps them get through their pathway to healing and justice. And with us all now being forced into stay-at-home orders, it's obviously much more challenging. And we don't pretend to believe that offering counseling services virtually makes them entirely accessible for all survivors, given the unique circumstances of their victimization and whether or not they're cohabitating with the people that are abusing them. And so I think that's what's really important, and all of our colleagues on this call have reiterated this message. First, Pamela McCauley mentioned the fact that safety planning is really important, that for some survivors, the idea of minimizing their risk and their harm during these critical times is going to be essential. And the advocates that answer all of these phone lines that have been shared today are experts in helping those who can call those hotlines navigate those circumstances. And secondly, to remember that there is no time limit to our ability to provide services, that we will be here when this pandemic lifts, and we will continue to think creatively about how we can do our work and provide these services. Both, I think what will happen will be a hybrid of virtual and in person. We know that in person wasn't entirely accessible to all communities either. And so this has given us a unique opportunity to think about how we can use technology to reach marginalized communities, to meet survivors with disabilities, to meet those that don't have access to transportation. And so I do think that on the other side of this pandemic will be an opportunity for us to provide services in a multitude of ways that we hadn't imagined before. But please know that right now we know that these are not perfect for all survivors, and that hopefully through the combination of all the different services that we've discussed today, we can make sure that no one is left behind.
And
Thanks, Patricia.
I'd also like to add on to what Pam and Patricia has said is about the use of technology that's available. I know in Passaic County, they actually put up a billboard to announce their phone app. Essex County is in the development of also developing a phone app so that people will have access to services, whether it's 2 o'clock in the afternoon or 2 a.m. in the morning. We also feel that working with marginalized communities, communities where there are language challenges, and we are prioritizing those services and hiring staff that are better able to communicate with the clientele that we are serving. We also have, during this time, this is a wonderful time to avail yourselves to all of the online webinars and classes in terms of increasing our skill set so that we're able to go out and to provide the level of care that is needed. But I can't stress enough that we are finite with our ability to reach everyone. We can't do this by ourselves. So we depend upon the community to take this information back and to share it with mothers and fathers, friends, relatives, and with the message that we want you safe. We want you whole. And I think most importantly, for those who are brave enough to come forward and tell their story, that we believe them. And to having people strategically in place, as I said, they may not be able to call us. They may be able to reach out to a friend or to a relative. And it's a wonderful thing to be able to have this information shared through those networks.
Thank you, Pam. So we've gone over an hour. I think we can go a little while longer. We have a lot of questions. I'm not sure we'll get through all of them, but let me just try to hit some of the questions and concerns that have come in. Some folks are asking for a link to download the PowerPoint or to get the slides and the information. We will make that available to you either through the email you registered to or by putting it up on our Attorney General's office website. So that'll be put out. There were some concerns about TROs and difficulty in getting follow-up from law enforcement or what instructions have been given to law enforcement about the availability of TROs. We issued guidance in early March, again, as the stay-at-home orders went into effect. At the same time, making clear to our law enforcement agencies across the state that they would be serving this purpose. They have to be available 24/7 to serve the needs of any victims that come forward to seek, whether it's a TRO or a TRPO, any sort of emergent application. If you are having difficulty, please reach out to your local county prosecutor's office, to any of the resources that we put up, to our office, and we will follow up. But no one should be being denied services at a local police department. And if that's happening, we need to hear those concerns. We talk to law enforcement daily. This morning, I had a call with almost 800 law enforcement officers from across the state who are out there on the front lines, who stand ready. And one of the points that we emphasize on those statewide calls is that they are there and available to victims to work on TROs, to work on TRPOs, to be there 24/7, even in this new reality. And they are, in fact, stepping up. But if there's any concerns, again, reach out and we will follow up. There was a question about the inmate releases, on whether wellness checks are done for those who are being released pursuant to any of these programs. The answer is yes. We are making sure that we are testing, we are doing temperature checks, and we are being mindful of those types of concerns. But importantly, we're connecting people to services and making sure that anyone who is released or receives that benefit pursuant to that program that we talked about earlier is connected to services. That if they need treatment services, if they need housing services, that we are making those efforts to connect them to services and making sure that that's done in a responsible way. We have a couple of questions that came in about volunteer opportunities, about people who might be at home or might be home from school or who might have an opportunity to volunteer. Are any of the organizations represented here accepting volunteers or taking advantage of volunteer services at this time? And if so, how?
So absolutely, the way that programs, thank you for that question and for the interest in volunteering. The way that programs are utilizing volunteers may be a bit different now. They're being very careful about health and safety of everyone involved, but absolutely reach out to your local program. You can find them through both of our websites, all of the websites that are listed below, and they would be eager to talk with you and happy to talk with you about ways that you can help.
Yes.
Patricia, anything to add? Is NJ Casa working with volunteers at this time?
Yeah, I want to echo Pam. Volunteering to do this type of work is pretty commendable, so we appreciate everyone's interest. It is a challenging time to begin volunteering. Anything that would require in-office duties, for example, would be incredibly limited because A, we're mostly working remotely, and obviously the emphasis on social distancing. But what we do know is that when this lifts, there will be an increased need for us to have a replenished and robust volunteer pool. And in fact, our confidential sexual violence advocates, many of them are volunteers across the state, and they are really the backbone for services, particularly for crisis response and hotline across the state. And being certified as a confidential sexual violence advocate is a tremendous time investment. It's a minimum of 40 hours worth of initial training, being trained, supervised, and managed by a county-based sexual violence service program, and then really volunteering your time to the point we raised on this call, at 3 a.m. to be the person that accompanies a survivor to an emergency room for what could be an hours-long experience, meeting with the rest of the colleagues of ours that work on sexual assault response teams. And so many of our organizations are creatively adapting their 40 hours of training to online modules where appropriate. And so reaching out to the local program in your county now to find out what their volunteer training plans look like so that we can have you as part of our volunteer pool when we're ready and able to accept volunteers back into this service area would be a tremendous help for all of us as we move forward.
Thank you. I think we'll do one or two more questions. So we've had several questions concerning court orders regarding parenting time schedules and custody issues at this time that that parents are using the stay-at-home orders as a reason not to comply with court orders. If you look at Executive Order 107, compliance with government orders or the direction of a government agency to include courts is one of the permitted reasons to leave your home. So that stay-at-home order should not be used as a shield against the reach of court orders or to violate court orders. And if that's happening, I would encourage you to report that through the appropriate channels. But the stay-at-home order doesn't mean that you don't have to comply with court orders. So I think with that, I'll just leave it, maybe give everyone a final opportunity to share any thoughts before we wrap up. Dee, do you want to start?
Yes, I do. And I apologize, I was kicked off for a little while and I think I was visible but couldn't hear anything. So if there was an inappropriate silence, that is why I couldn't hear you. I just am so thrilled with how many people have joined. We got a lot of questions that came in about the trauma recovery centers that are going to be launched. And so I just wanted to tell everybody that we'll get the information up on our website right away. And also, if you want to chat in your email address, I'm happy to send you follow up on that. But we'll get that on the web, as I'm sure you can understand. We've been consumed with COVID-19. So anyway, I'm so in awe. I want everybody to know that these three women on this call, this webinar, have been working 24/7, and that is, I think, the same for all the folks who provide victim services throughout the state. And if people are experiencing any problems, if there are changes we need to make, improvements, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. You can send your email address to me on chat. I am grateful to be of service to the Attorney General, to these advocates, and to all of the victim survivors throughout New Jersey. And please be safe and be healthy.
Thank you, E. Patricia, Pam's, any final thoughts before we wrap up?
Sure. Again, to echo everyone else, just thank you so much for giving us an opportunity to be in community with all of you today. Thank you to all of those that took time out of what are incredibly, surprisingly, even though most of us aren't traveling anywhere, hectic and busy days as we're figuring out parenting routines and working at home with partners and four-leggeds and all of the other new realities that we're experiencing. And I just want to leave you with sort of a note of hope. And in fact, it was the Attorney General last year at the Crime Victims' Rights Week event, which I'm sad that we won't get to do this year, that really reinforced one of the core tenets of our work, and that's prevention is possible. That we spent a lot of time on this call today talking about all of the robust and necessary services that are available after victimization. But the reality is that interpersonal violence is 100% preventable. And now more than ever, we're home with our families and our loved ones and can really reinforce messages of bodily autonomy and consent and community connectedness and start to really plant those seeds for the young people in our lives and understanding, particularly now in the middle of a global pandemic, how one person's actions really impact so many other people. And those are the types of core messages that really resonate as we're talking about prevention of interpersonal violence, that there's nothing that we do that doesn't impact someone else, perhaps for a lifetime. And so to be mindful of these opportunities to instill those little nuggets of wisdom for the people that we love and we care about, so that in the future, we're not worried about staying at home with people in our families and in our communities, that every place that we live and work is a place of safety and trust. And we can all do that. So thank you so much for giving us an opportunity to be with you.
Thank you, Patricia, for your time and for all the great work that you're doing at NJ CASA. Pam Jacobs or Pam McCauley?
Thank you, General. I just want to say that all of the victim witness coordinators who are working diligently, working from home, working remotely, that we are available, that we do not take the trust that is given us, that has been given to us to provide services and care, whether it's during this pandemic or even beyond. We are available, and that goes beyond, normal working hours. For those of us who are in this field, we are in this field not because as a vocation. This is an avocation. This is a calling. And this is something that we do not take lightly. We understand that services and help has to go beyond normal business hours. And we are there to serve. It is an honor, a noble pursuit to provide a level of care to those who are hurting and who are disenfranchising. I want to take the opportunity to thank you for this trust, and we will continue in our service to those within our communities and our support of programs throughout the state. We are all in this together, and we want to be part of the cure and the hope that we want to see in the world. So thank you very much, General. And to my colleagues, it is a wonderful thing to be able to work with you and not only call you colleagues, but friends and advocates in this war against not only this virus, but against gratuitous violence within our communities. So thank you for your service.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Pam and Patricia and E and Attorney General, everyone here. It's such an honor.
Thank you, Pam McCauley.
Oh. Thank you so much. So it's an honor to be here with everyone on the panel, and just thank you to everyone who joined, to all of the advocates who are on with us today, who are working tirelessly. You really truly are the heroes, the sheroes of this work. You're on the front lines every single day, and I'm just so honored to have the opportunity to work alongside such incredible people every day. It really doesn't feel like work, it feels like an honor. So I just again want to reiterate that we're here for you. We'll be here, as Patricia said, we'll be here when this is long behind us, and I know we're all looking forward to that day. And we're here not only to respond after something happens, but to make sure that it doesn't happen. So I want to echo those messages of prevention as well, that this is not something that we all have to sit around and wait for something to happen to someone we love before we act. We can start teaching these messages now. So I definitely encourage everyone to check out the great work that's being done by NJ CASA, especially during the Sexual Assault Awareness and Prevention Month. We've also been doing Facebook Live events with our incredible team to talk about things like relationship de-escalation, different ways that we can really work together to help prevent these things from happening, as well as safety planning and things we can all do in the event that something like this does occur for someone you care about. So I just want to again reiterate what so many of you have said, that it's important that we work together to stay safe, to stay strong, to stay connected and informed, and make sure we're helping to connect one another to these resources. And just, we will get through this together. So thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Well, let me finish by thanking all of our panelists for the information that they shared, for their time. Let me thank also everyone at the Attorney General's office that helped make our first virtual 2121 an incredible success. We had upwards of 400 people online at the peak of our webcast, and we had about 500 people registered. And so I want to thank all of you for taking time out of your daily schedules, for informing yourselves, and for hopefully taking away some information that could help you or help someone you know at this difficult time. I know it's easy to feel disconnected in this new reality in which we find ourselves, but hopefully what we've shown through this webcast is that we are even more connected right now. One of the speakers mentioned that earlier, that we are even more socially connected right now. I don't think we could have ever reached 400 people in one in-person 2121 in any one of our counties. But today we've reached upwards of 400 people through our efforts this afternoon. So again, I hope that makes people feel a little bit more comforted to know that we are out there working on these issues, working on the prevention, which is equally as important as the response, and letting people know that these services are still available for victims and survivors throughout our state. So again, thank you for taking the time this afternoon. I wish everyone that everyone stays safe and healthy at this incredibly difficult time. So thanks to all. And I guess let me also, one last piece, remind you that we're going to do our next COVID-19 town hall on Thursday, April 30th, and it's going to talk about the law enforcement response to the COVID-19 pandemic, and we'll recognize some of the incredible first responders out there who are doing incredible work under extremely difficult circumstances at this time. So please join us for our next virtual 2121. Thank you.